Hi, friends, and welcome back to Self Meets Soul, a podcast where we discuss how to discover what sets your soul on fire and modern ways to integrate spirituality into your daily life. My name is Juliana, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about creating and maintaining boundaries. Boundaries are guidelines we create to protect our time, energy, emotions, and well being, and they are really crucial to all of our relationships. I think sometimes people just assume that you only create boundaries once a situation has become toxic, but that could not be further from the truth. Boundaries are really important in making sure that you create healthy relationships and that they're able to remain healthy. And on an internal note, they're also important to staying true to yourself. You are a unique person who has unique needs, and that is something that should be honored. And of course, boundaries are also important because, as I mentioned, they prioritize your well being and they fill your cup so that you can spread your light, your positivity, your energy to others. Now, you may be listening to this and thinking, okay, how can I tell if I need more boundaries? You might be thinking about the relationships that you currently have. A good way to know is if you, in any situations, or maybe even just in general, or there's certain people you might be thinking about, if you feel depleted, resentful, overwhelmed, or guilty for saying no to people. And people pleasers, I'm looking right at you. When we think about boundaries, we typically think about our relationship to other people, but there are different kinds of boundaries that you can set in your life. One of them being emotional boundaries. Those are typically what you think of, just boundaries that you set with others to protect your feelings and your energy. There's also physical boundaries that have to do with your personal space and physical comfort, so maintaining that. There's time boundaries, saying no to overcommitment. Digital boundaries, which is managing your social media and online interactions. That probably wasn't something that existed not too long ago, but having boundaries with your digital life, how much time you're spending online, is very important as well. And then your spiritual boundaries. So protecting your beliefs, your faith, your practices, and knowing that whatever you choose to do, whatever you choose to believe in, that is what is right for you. Now, as we know, there are all different kinds of relationships that we have in our lives, so I'm kind of going to categorize them here and talk about how I create boundaries in these different relationships. So, first, my work relationships. I am really good at creating boundaries with work, actually. I think this is one of the places where I excel because I was just born, in the late 90s. I'm a zillennial. I am not going to be doing more work than I need to at any point. Now, my sister, on the other hand, and she's a true millennial, like 1990, this is something I'm sure she could grow in as well. And, like I mentioned, sometimes that's just generational. So I create boundaries in my work life. I'm going to be taking my PTO. I am calculating my PTO. I am seeing what day I can take off for whatever reason. I'm going to be taking that time off and taking my vacation. And if you're at a company where I'm sure, like most places, you can roll over a certain amount of PTO hours, you definitely can do that. I know I did that at the end of last year because I had to save up a bunch of time for my upcoming Italy trip. But if you have like nothing you're really saving up for, then take that PTO. Just because it's going to roll over doesn't mean you have to roll over the max amount of hours that your company will let you, because you are leading yourself to burnout and just, again, spending all this time at work when, yes, we have to work to survive, but you should also be out there exploring and taking time for you and doing the things that you want to do. I also create boundaries at work by doing what is asked of me and really not that much more. I think a shock for me leaving the teaching world was realizing that, well, I was just like in shock because I would get praise at work for doing what was asked of me. And I'm like, oh, okay, but this was what I was supposed to do. Obviously, I didn't say that, but I thought it. And that kind of made me realize that there's a lot of people in the workforce, a lot of adults who don't even do that, what they're supposed to be doing. So One way that I create my boundaries is I do exactly what I'm expected to do. Maybe I help out a teammate here or there, but that is it. You're not going to catch me going above and beyond on every single project, every single task, especially when, that, like, I know a lot of people do that to get raises or promotions or whatever, but that's not even guaranteed. So create that boundary. Going along with doing what is asked of me at work, I also start and finish my workday as expected. I'm salaried, so when I'm working from home, my hours are a little more flexible, but I'm working my 8 hours flat. I don't really take a lunch, so it's like, okay, at 8 hours is going to be 3:40. I'm logging off at 3:40, and I'm not spending another minute there. And I've noticed that the times where I do have to spend like more time after because I get caught in like a Teams meeting or whatever it is, something unexpected, that I tend to get annoyed pretty much immediately because I have that strict boundary with work. Another place to make sure that you are creating boundaries is with your family. And this one can be really tricky, especially for different family dynamics. This may be easier in some families than others, but regardless, it is important that you stick to your guns and create the boundaries in your family that are needed to protect your well-being. A way that I do this with my own family is by asserting myself as an adult. Because I am the baby of the family and I have a pretty big age gap between me and my sister, so I think for mainly my sister and my mom, sometimes it's hard for them to see me as an adult. Like, they know that I'm an adult, they're proud of my adult accomplishments, but when I'm back in that house, man, it's like I kind of revert back to my childlike self in a way, or my teenager self, and I just find myself like caught under their rules. Now, don't get me wrong, like, I understand their rules. If I'm going to be at their house, I have to respect them. But at the same time, I make sure that they are aware, like, yes, I'm an adult. I make my own decisions. I have the money to get a tattoo. It's my body, so I'm going to get a tattoo. Maybe I've been sick for a couple of days, but maybe I just want to wait one more day instead of going to the doctor, instead of going right in that moment. Now, not to say that the family can't be right sometimes, of course, but that is how I create my boundaries, by just making sure they remember that I am an adult, and at the end of the day, it's my life, so I'm going to do whatever I want with it, and that includes making mistakes sometimes, which I know is very hard for parents. Another boundary that I create with my family is to typically spend no more than a week at home at a time. I've noticed that about after this 1 week mark, me and my mom are getting in a lot more arguments, and I'm just getting really annoyed. In general, like, me and my mom are both Leos. She has told me before that I remind her of herself when she was my age, and I really don't doubt that she's wrong. But I know that we tend to butt heads when we spend a lot of time together, because that kind of happens when you got two people who are similar and stubborn. So I don't want to create that energy. I want to have good memories with my family and not, get into arguments if possible. So I try to spend, a week at home, and no more than that, because I know things can get awkward if I'm there longer. Now, when it comes to creating boundaries in my friendships, this is something I struggle with sometimes, especially learning how to say no to things. I am just like such a slave to FOMO, and if you don't know what FOMO is, it's fear of missing out. I really don't want to miss out on things. I love having memories with my friends. If I say no to something, I'm like, dang, I wonder what they're doing. I bet they're having so much fun. But the fact of the matter is, I get overwhelmed a lot. I overbook myself. I run from one thing to the other. Literally 3 Saturdays ago, I had plans with 4 different people. I had a date, and then I had plans with 3 different groups of friends. Like, was that necessary? No, but I want to spend time. Like, my love language is quality time. So I want to make sure that I can spend as much time as possible with my friends. And when you're an adult, you can't really do that during the weekday that much because we're getting old and tired. So that really only gives me 2 days to squeeze in all of my friendships. And yeah, that leads to me feeling overwhelmed a lot. So one way I'm trying to create more boundaries is learning how to say no, even if I want to say yes sometimes, and really just tuning in with myself and saying, am I going to be overwhelmed by this? Am I being stressed out? Have I had any time to myself in the last few days? And if the answer is no, then that might mean I have to say no to that hangout. Also, in total raw honesty, another thing that I have been kind of dealing with for the last few years, and very few of my friends know that this is something that I have been struggling with, but it is the reciprocation of my time. In college and even like immediately post college, I was always the one who not only brought everybody together, but people make friends off of me. Like, I have friends, I introduce them to another group of friends, and then they become friends. That's something that happens a lot in my life. And it's not so much that has been an uncomfortable situation for me, although I'm not gonna lie, like sometimes it has. But the main thing is, like, now that I'm older and I have such a busy life and I have different relationships to maintain, I have become increasingly frustrated at friendships, relationships where it's always me initiating plans, initiating seeing someone. And sure, they may say yes, but it's never me getting texted asking if I want to hang out, checking in on how I'm doing. It's always the other way around. And as I've gotten older and found new friendships where that's not an issue, that has become something that is like very in my field of awareness, I guess you could say. So a boundary that I'm creating this year is really minimizing the amount of times that I reach out to certain people and just sitting back and seeing, like, okay, are they going to reach out to me if I don't reach out to them? And I don't know, maybe that sounds petty to some people, but I think that one thing I've been talking about with my therapist, not just in friendships, but in general, is making sure that the energy I'm putting out is being reciprocated. And if it's not, then matching that person's energy. And that is a boundary in my friendships that I am learning to take. When it comes to romantic relationships, I typically create boundaries by expressing my needs and feelings. Now, in past relationships, when I've done this, it has been not received well every time. It's kind of been taken as an attack. And, maybe that's not always the other person's fault. I'm sure sometimes my delivery wasn't the best. However, I have a lot of, fear in expressing my needs, in fear of like retaliation and not being understood. So I know now that moving forward in romantic relationships, it is going to be really important for me to feel like I can express what my needs are and what my feelings are about something, and feeling like that's being heard. And finally, how I create boundaries in my spiritual relationships is by taking what I need and avoiding comparison. I think in the spiritual community, comparison really, my yoga teacher said this a couple weeks ago, and I was like kind of laughing because I was like, God, she's making it sound so corny, but it is true. Like, comparison is the thief of joy. And on your spiritual journey, it becomes really, really freaking easy to compare yourself to other people in the community. Like, oh my gosh, she looks like someone more spiritual than me, like the way that she dresses, her aura, look at what she's doing. Like, she's not even working in corporate, she's just doing spiritual work full time. And that can be a really easy trap to fall into. So trying to create those boundaries by just taking what lessons you need from those people in your spiritual relationships, and making sure that you understand that you're on your own journey and that's going to look different for you, and your timing is going to be different as well. So those are just a few examples of how I create boundaries in the different aspects of my life. Now, creating those boundaries is important. However, maintaining them is even more essential, and that can be even harder sometimes. So one way to maintain boundaries in your relationships is to get over the fear of disappointing others. People pleasers, I told you I would be coming for your necks later, and this is what I mean. I know how hard it is to feel like you are disappointing other people. Sometimes my people pleasing can get so bad that when I'll go on like 1, 2 dates with a guy, and I have so much anxiety about like letting them down and letting them know like it's not a fit. And why? Like, first off, I don't really know you. You don't really know me. Second off, why am I so afraid of creating this boundary of not continuing a connection that I know isn't serving either of us, right? Easier said than done, but you have to get over the fear of disappointing others. Granted, that may mean you're going to fake it till you make it for a while. You might create that boundary, and there comes a time where you have to stick to it, and you might hate it, and you might feel icky about it, and you might cry, and you might feel anxious and scared. But as long as you do it, you will eventually just kind of slowly get over that fear of disappointing other people and learning to put yourself at the forefront. Another way to maintain boundaries in relationships is to remind people of your boundaries in an assertive but compassionate way. And I do this by explaining my thought process. Now, this can be a slippery slope, okay? I'm going to get into this later, what I mean by that. But when it comes to people who I really, really value, which typically that's all of my friendships, I don't have an issue explaining why I'm creating a boundary in the moment. So, for example, I have a friend who actually wanted us to get lunch or dinner, whatever it is, once a month, just as a for sure way that we're going to see each other because, adulting is hard and busy. And the date came, we were trying to figure out a time, a spot, and she lives on the opposite side of town. Okay, I'm probably being dramatic, but she basically lives in an area that's not like within 15 minutes of me, and in Arizona, that's just a lot. And she was like, oh, it's actually, and we take turns. This is which side of town we're going to be on. That's how we try to make it fair. So she was like, oh, it's actually your turn to come over here. And I was just like, I really don't want to. The night before, my dad was in town. I had to drive him 30 minutes away back to his resort, which was fine because I rarely see him and I'm obsessed with him. But I was still like, I just drove like really late last night on the opposite side of town. I'm honestly like, I really just don't feel like driving that far. And I had a late work meeting and it was going to be rush hour. And I just wasn't feeling it. It was just something I didn't want to do. And so I let her know that. I said, I'm not really up to it because of XYZ. I gave her all of my reasonings. I was assertive about it, but I was basically letting her know where I was coming from and that I was feeling tired, what my emotions were. That way she could better receive that boundary. And with this friend, I really never have issues with her in general when it comes to boundaries. She is like quite literally one of the most mature friends when it comes to me expressing my feelings and things like that. And so she was like, you know what, I totally get it. Like, it's fine. We'll just skip this month. I'm going to see you in a couple weeks anyways. It was totally fine. However, that's not always how people are going to respond. So another way that you should maintain boundaries is be ready to cut off people if there's too much pushback or resistance. And that's hard, okay? Cutting off people out of your life, removing people from your field, or as my friend Morgan puts it, everyone has like there's circles in your life. There's your inner circle, and then there's a circle that's around that, and then around that one, and the outer circles. So maybe moving people from one circle to the next one. That is something that you might have to do. Last year, there was a relationship with a friend where I felt like my boundaries were continuously getting pushed, and I really cared about this friend and I loved this friend. And I was like, this is getting really hard. And I talked to my therapist about it. I'm like, they keep pushing my boundaries, and it's like getting to the point where my nervous system is like getting riled up around them because I'm just anxious about their response to the things I say and do. And so it ended up being a thing where mutually we both kind of just, stop talking and things like that. But I was getting to the point where if that didn't happen, I was going to straight up have to be like, this relationship is not working anymore. I think we need to set these boundaries. I'm telling you, this is what they are, even though I have been trying to express them, but being maybe even more explicit about it. And if you can't respect that and honor that, then I don't have space for you in my life. And as I've mentioned, that can be hard. However, how do you expect people to take you seriously and take you by your word if you don't stay true to it? So you need to create these boundaries in your relationships, and you need to stick to them and let people around you know that there are consequences to not respecting your boundaries, because not everybody should have access to your energy field. Now, there's a lot of talk out there about, or myths, I should say, about creating boundaries. And one of them is that boundaries are selfish. And no, it's not. Boundaries are essential for creating and maintaining these healthy relationships. Because when you are able to do that, when you are able to establish your boundaries, then the person opposite you is also able to do that as well. And then you're fostering a relationship of trust, of respect, and of more love. You might also think, well, if I make certain boundaries, people will leave me. And okay, let them leave you, okay? If people cannot respect your boundaries, then they don't need to be in your life. They don't need to have access to you. Or maybe, it's not a relationship like that. Of course, like say it's a family member, you're not about to cut off your family member or something like that. Although I know some people do, but maybe that's not something you're willing to do. That's fine. But don't let them have access to all these deeper parts of you, access to your time, as much as they previously might have. Okay? The right people will respect these boundaries that you create, and they will work with you to maintain them. Now, I said I would circle back to this. The last myth that people have about boundaries and misconception is that you have to explain your boundaries. Now, I mentioned earlier, just a minute ago, with this whole situation with my friend and our dinner plans, and how I explained why I was creating that boundary that day of, not going. You don't always have to do that. And you especially don't have to do that with people you don't know. So people pleasers, try to avoid over explaining your boundaries. A simple no suffices. You don't have to do that. Mini story time here. There was a guy who took my yoga class, and whatever, we were kind of flirty. It was fine. He wanted to take me on a date, and we were texting, and I was like, okay, one thing I do want to know before I agree to go on this date with you, because in my head, like, once you are on a date with someone, like, in person, and, you're exchanging details about your life, that's a little more intimate than just texting conversations. So I said, one thing I gotta know is your political views. I want to know what, political party you identify with, and I'm cue the people who are like, oh my gosh, that's our problem with today's world. We're separating ourselves based on our political party. But I think we all know, when you have the president that we have in America right now, when you are a woman, when you are a person of color, it matters, okay? It matters a lot. So I asked this man, and he basically told me he doesn't like Trump, but he typically has voted red, but he tries to stay. The thing that really stuck with me, and it's actually funny because if you're watching Love is Blind season 8 right now, this came up in the pods. He said that he tries to, kind of stay out of it because politics is depressing. Now, some of you will already get why this answer sucks. But for those of you who don't, I don't have time or want to entertain people who say they are, apolitical about things, because that says to me that you have the privilege of not caring. That says to me that you have an egocentric outlook on the world, meaning that unless something is directly impacting you or someone in your circles that you love, you don't really care about it, or you don't really have an opinion. And I just don't think personally right now we can afford to not have an opinion on things. And as someone who is in multiple groups that are targeted and oppressed, you can say, I just don't really jive with that. And so I said, okay, thank you for sharing. I did create a boundary, and I literally use that word. I said I did create a boundary when it comes to dating about how I really only want to date people who have the same political view as me. Also, because I was just in a really long relationship where that was one of the reasons that we broke up, because I decided to not have that boundary. And he sends me this long message about how I led him on and yada yada yada. Doesn't really matter. But the thing is, I said no. I said that was my boundary. And I was like, I even gave him a little something. And I didn't have to. I even gave him a little something. I just said, oh, I kind of, have kind of learned this lesson. This is a boundary I've set in dating. Good luck out there. And he didn't respond well to that. And so, goodbye. I'm not going on this date. All of this to say, boundaries are important, essential, crucial, all of the good things to maintaining your relationships in a healthy and positive way and maintaining your well-being. So I challenge you to think about, where in your life do you need stronger boundaries? So this can be something you journal about, or just something that you think about as you go into the rest of your week. Well, that's all that I have for you today, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode, be sure to leave a review and share this podcast. You never know who in your life might resonate with it. Chat with you later.